Welcome to episode 4 of Creature Comforts, a spin-off series of the Straight Chilling podcast. On this show, though, we love to explore the fringes of horror and all things horror adjacent. I'm your host, Soju, and today we're going to be doing a movie review of the 1999 film Fight Club, directed by David Fincher. Now, David Fincher is the type of director who I feel like often toes the line of horror. A lot of his films are very dark in nature. They deal with a lot of dark themes. And I feel like he does a kind of grounded, realistic gore really well, too. I was actually inspired to pick this film by our guest this week, who had a pretty interesting take on this film from the realm of horror, or looking at it as if it were a horror film. And so before I get too far into it, let's go ahead and meet our guest for this week. And our guest this week is Matt from Bold City Longsword and the Swords in Stereo podcast. Welcome, Matt. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm pretty excited to talk about Fight Club.
Yeah, man. So I gotta say that my previous episodes, I keep this like running list, and I have films on there that I think like, oh, that's really interesting. But this one was not on my list. I haven't watched or thought about Fight Club in a long time, but you are, certified hashtag hard with us. I need to make a certification for hashtag hard with us just so I can give it to you, because you're like the definition of like hard with us.
I will hang it in my office if you send it to me.
I got to get ready to work it up. But you posted this idea in the Slack that we're going to talk about later, kind of an idea about Fight Club. And I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And immediately like text you, please come on and do the show with me. And so I feel very lucky to have you here, and that you sparked this brilliant idea that we're going to talk about today. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Matt, before we get started, where can people check out your stuff, and what do you do?
So I teach German longsword, historical fencing. I trained from a book that was written in 1570 by Joachim Meyer. And we take this old book that's been translated from Middle German to Modern German to English, and we figure out what it says, and then we recreate the actions and concepts within the book.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and then we have a podcast where we can talk about it and break it down. It's pretty cool. The art died, so like we're figuring everything out from scratch. So it's pretty cool.
That's intense, because that makes me think of people who kind of translate this like dead language out of nothing. I'm like, how do they know what that sounded like or what they did? And you're kind of doing the same thing with movements and like fighting styles. And you are like kind enough to give the Straight Chillin' Boys a demonstration a while back. And it was like very interesting and a lot of fun. And I love the historical aspect of it too. I think that's what's super interesting to me. So it's really cool work that you're doing.
Yeah, luckily your body only moves so many ways. So like you got 2 elbows, 2 knees. There's you can get close fairly easy. It's finding the little details that's hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I bet it's a really fun way to stay in shape. And it seems like you've built a really good community. You guys go into like all the exhibitions and the shows and stuff and listen to the podcast. You guys, like I said, a lot of it is historical and interesting to me. And just like the kind of culture that's built around it. So it's super interesting. Good work, man.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're also like our go-to guy when we do, the Green Knight on the main podcast, or we did the Northman as well, right? Yeah. So you're our go-to sword guy, but today you get to talk about something that's not sword related.
Not one sword in this whole movie.
Yeah, so we won't pigeonhole you too much, and we'll let you break out of your shell a little bit on this one. And with that, we'll say that today we are talking about Fight Club. This came out in 1999. Directed by David Fincher, starring Brad Pitt, Helena Carter, Meatloaf, Jared Leto, which like he looks like totally different in this movie. Ed Norton, of course. That dude from Mindhunters is in here. Not
Yeah,
like
yeah.
deeply, but Holt, what's his name? Did I write it down? Holt something, I think. I was like, oh my God, dude looks so young when he popped up. So yeah, pretty stacked cast. David Fincher, surprisingly enough, too. I wasn't putting the pieces together, but when I was going through my list of movies I kind of want to cover, there's a lot of David Fincher on
Yeah.
there.
He
Not,
rides that dark, gritty line that could almost be horror. He hasn't made a horror movie yet, but he's
yeah.
came awful close a lot.
Yeah. That's it. He's always towing the line. Well, no, I might see one of the movies I haven't put on the list is Seven, because I would say that Seven is a horror film. I would totally have that on the cast, but that's another debate for another time.
Yeah, yeah, it's right there on the line.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very dark. Um,
hmm But a lot of his films, you're right, he toes that line, and if it's not horror, it's at least like horror adjacent and stuff like that. So it's he does, yeah. He's always got these dark elements in it. But before we get into is this horror, we don't want to break that spoiler yet. Let's just do Matt. Generally, would you recommend people check out Fight Club?
oh, very much so. This was probably my favorite movie for like 15 years. Like when I was in my 20s in my first apartment, I think we just had the loading screen that shows the condo. We just had it on at all times.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's
very much so. Check it out.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I generally would recommend people check this out. I hadn't watched it in a while, and it just kind of lives in my mind as this kind of classic. And specifically on this watch, this time capsule, which we're going to talk about more in depth later of, when this came out and what was going on at the time. But it came out in 1999 and just always lived in my mind as this kind of classic type of film. And so, I don't know, like the aging of it is interesting, and I want to talk about that. And I would be curious to talk about like somebody from a younger generation that didn't grow up with this film and how they perceived it. But I do still kind of hold it in my mind as a classic type of film that generally people definitely should check out for sure. So, all right. Well, with that, I'm gonna go ahead and drop a spoiler warning.
Spoiler warning.
Nice and smooth. Look at that. All right. So, Matt, I'm doing something for the first time on this show. So you're my guinea pig. And I'm trying to introduce some new segments that are a little different from our main podcast show, and that kind of tie into the kind of reason I started this, which is to explore the ideas of horror adjacent films, things on the fringes of horror. Is it horror? Is it not horror? And so I came up with this kind of new little segment that I'm calling right now Coulda, Woulda, Shoulda. And it's three questions. And the first one for could you put this film into a specific horror subgenre, and which one? So, Matt, what do you think? Could this fit somewhere in the horror realm?
I mean, you could force it in. I personally wouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
but like any fall of society or apocalyptic movie where people are they're like an in-depth of their own psyche,
Mm-hmm.
like Shutter Island where someone's slowly going crazy. All
Mm-hmm.
those movies I think are based on their theme alone horror adjacent, and
Mm-hmm.
you could put Fight Club over there. it
Mm-hmm.
it might it might not be close, or there could be movies much closer to horror than Fight Club, but it
Mm-hmm.
would fit in with those movies.
Okay. So kind of like a fall society and kind of stuff like that. So the thing that you mentioned on the Slack that really kind of caught my attention was that you considered this film kind of like a sneaky cult film.
Oh, for sure, they're in a cult.
Yeah.
I went and I deep dived into it, and
Mm-hmm.
all they check almost every box. I think the reason it's sneaky is their dogma's not religious, so people
Mhm,
don't automatically go, well, that's a cult, because
mhm.
they never bring up a deity or anything like that. It's just a philosophy.
Yeah, they worship themselves kind of in a way. But yeah, so that's what really I was like, oh shit, because I really do love a good cult horror film. The Sacrament, I absolutely love. Um, the Invitation, stuff like that. So I was like, that's a really interesting idea. Let's explore that. However, on this watch, I kind of went in a different direction. After I finished the watch, I was like, where could this potentially be inspired by some horror? And I chose Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, the kind of split personality
Yeah,
aspect of it.
yeah,
Because that's such a classic horror literature that, like, almost everybody kind of knows, at least, even if they've never read it. And of course, there are many films inspired by that that are considered classics as well. And so I was like, oh, I think if I had to kind of pigeonhole it into some kind of subgenre, I think it would probably fit best there with that kind of split personality. One seemingly good, innocent, trying to help humanity in some way, and one is kind of the evil one seeking out the destruction. So, yeah. The second question is the wood. Would you consider this horror or horror adjacent, Matt?
oh, I wouldn't.
Okay.
It really, but it does build up a sense of dread the whole time. Like, you feel this guy's life falling apart, and right when he thinks he's getting his shit together, or he thinks he's getting his shit together, it just starts falling apart even more, and going way worse than it was before he came to this revelation about himself. So like there is that sense of dread and dark comedy throughout.
Yeah. And I guess since it's my job, I will have to take the opposite. I'll have to play devil's advocate and say this. I As far as horror adjacent goes, when you're looking at elements of horror, this has like you said, the dread. It pulls from elements of the split personality. It's very nihilistic, and it has a lot of gore. People are dying in some ways, people are getting their faces bashed in, their teeth knocked out, and it kind of like brings it like straight to your face for sure. And so I think well, okay, so I want to ask you a surprise question then. So kind of going off another one of the woods is, what one element in this film would you change to make it move closer to horror?
Well, there's this whole sense of like they have this whole sense of life is meaningless,
Mhm.
nothing's worth anything.
Mhm.
And that is very Lovecraftian,
Mm.
where humanity doesn't matter, the gods
Mhm.
don't care about us. Like Lovecraft writes about that all the time.
Mhm.
And you could easily this cult could easily have went that direction at the end of the movie, kind of like and they could have added something like the end of that first episode of Cabinet of Curiosities at the end, and it would have
Mhm.
blown my mind. Um, so yeah, that's what I would add personally because that's what I like.
Yeah, I would say even though we have prominent horror comedies, I would say the comedy beats in this film drive it more to have this lighthearted feeling. When Ed Norton is running through the streets with in his boxers or whatever, because they tried to take his balls and stuff like that. Um, I think this does have a very prominent sense of like these comedic beats that make it feel kind of lighter. And so if I wanted to make it darker or more horror driven, I would kind of like axe those a little bit, which make it really dark. Not that I don't enjoy them, I just got to move it closer to horror. And okay, and the final question would be, this is the should. If someone enjoyed this film, what horror film should they check out?
I would do I would either go like from the psychological angle where
Hmm.
you see someone losing their mind and questioning their existence.
Hmm.
Jacob's Ladder. It's one of my favorite movies. It was the first
Hmm.
movie I had the cast cover when
Yeah.
I did a You Pick the Flick. Uh, very similar, Jack, the narrator from Fight Club, and the main character from Jacob's Ladder are kind of going through they're rethinking their life. If you want to do like the post-apocalyptic mindset, you can't beat Night of the Living Dead remake 1990. It's also one of the best movies ever made.
There you go.
And you just watching it makes you think about society collapsing with the same way Fight Club does. So depending on what part of Fight Club you like, I'd pick one of those movies.
Okay. I picked American Psycho.
Yes.
Because and that's when I think about this movie, like how could it be horror? I think about making it more like American Psycho because it deals with a lot of the similar kind of themes. This character who's in the society where he doesn't really fit in, he tries to pretend to fit in and it doesn't match who he is. And that starts to affect his psyche. And instead of the 90s, it's the 80s. So just a decade before. And like, I think that is kind of how you could make Fight Club more of a horror film is like American Psycho, which is like a pure classic type of horror for me. And so once this film was done, I was like, oh shit, this is very similar to American Psycho, just for a different decade.
It's weird that you brought that up because Tyler and the Jason Bateman often get brought up as people who get idolized when they shouldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, people are real big fans of these people when they're not good role models at all. So yeah, that's awesome that you brought him up.
Yeah, and even that sense of like like that to that point, good looking and kind of influential in some ways, and just like a silver tongue and that kind of thing. So yeah, and that's an interesting aspect. So so let's get into the kind of meat and potatoes of this film. Then there's like we could talk about this film for hours and hours and hours and hours.
I was actually kind of once I said yes, I was like, what did I do?
Yeah.
Because there's this movie attacks capitalism, it attacks materialism, it goes in depth about modern masculinity, and all these are like trigger issues that you really want to be careful what you say, or at least have your thoughts planned out and not just start rambling, because it's so easy to put your foot in your mouth.
Yeah, and I might do that a couple of you came very prepared, Matt. I gotta say, I like really appreciate it. I saw your notes. I was like, God damn, I need to step up my game. So I might do that today. I might put my foot in my mouth, but I want to have a good discussion. And this is where I wanted to start. Feel free to jump around and go wherever you want. But there was this quote that really struck me in a couple ways as I continued to watch this film. And I think that this kind of theme is woven into so much of this film, but it was the quote he says toward the beginning of this film of, "What dining room set defined me as a person?" This sense of identity. Who am I? What can I buy that defines me? And even doing that, it's kind of kind of funny. Like a deeper theme I want to get into is he's looking through an IKEA catalog, this Swiss furniture. I think his coffee table is like a yin yang. And so how the irony of like how would that define you as a person, and the misery it brings him and his justification for destroying everything ultimately through this complete lack of identity.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of us fall into that trap where we just go through our life, we just go through the paces, and if we step back and think about it too much, you're like I work in a factory, so like I know exactly what he's going through, and I'm like, oh, I made Anheuser-Busch some more money today, go me, but and then it's also the paradox of choice, where we have so many options now that your dining set, you have to pick one of them.
Yeah.
So the one they give you 15 to 40 options in that catalog. He had to pick one that defied him. He couldn't get out of that choice. He had to do it. And once that happens enough, you look around and you're like, this must be who I am, because these are the choices I keep making and keep making.
Well, that's an interesting idea of the The idea of choice, he had to choose. And in life, as you build your identity or as you start to become who you're going to become, in this way too, I like you're sympathetic toward the character when maybe you shouldn't be as much, but he says things that I feel like resonate with a lot of society. And specifically, I want to talk about like me and you. There were times where I feel like this movie was speaking to me, like my demographic specifically. And there's this line of, I'm a 30-year-old boy, a generation of men raised by women. So to go to the idea of like you have to choose, how do you choose? This feeling of like lack of identity because there was no guidance. How do I become a man? There's no man here to teach me how to go about life, how to make these choices in a certain manner. And I feel like a lot of this character's problems stem from this continual, he drops these little hints of his abandonment by his father.
Yeah, him and Tyler talk about their dad the whole movie,
Yeah.
and there's even that line where he says, "Our fathers are our model for God,"
Mhm.
and if your father abandoned you, what does that tell you about God? And, I think
Mhm.
we've most people I meet now are a product of divorce,
Mm.
and most divorces the kids do go with the mom,
Mhm.
and um like I there are basic things I should know that I were never taught that I have to look up on YouTube now,
Yeah. Mhm.
like I didn't know how to fix my sink. I had to
Mhm.
go on YouTube and have someone show me how to fix my sink
Mhm.
when, in the 50s, that wouldn't have been the case.
Mhm.
Every man was a handyman in the 50s, or at least that's what they want us to believe.
Mhm.
And I think there's also that aspect of we we look back at the past
Mhm.
and we see what we want to see, and we
Mhm.
see that, well, men were very manly back then, uh and we honestly don't know if that's true. There could have been as many schmucks back then as there is now,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know uh so I think a lot of it's just we're projecting
Mm.
that we have failed somehow
Mhm.
onto ourselves because
Mhm.
there's no one around to tell us that we didn't.
Yeah, exactly. That yeah, and that's that sense of kind of like identity of like almost I don't know how to become a person or the person I should be when we're dealing with things like, this is a very male-centered film. And specifically when I said I feel like this movie is speaking to me and my demographic, 1999, like white men, you know, who are you? Who are you in this society? Why do you feel this way? Um, it's an interesting thing to look back on now, getting
Yeah,
close to 30 years later.
there was the internet wasn't what it was.
Mhm.
This is pre 9/11. We had a
Mhm.
totally different view on terrorism when this
Mhm.
movie came out. Um, like the I follow UFC and MMA and
Mhm.
jiu-jitsu. Like I follow those sports. Those were not mainstream at the time. So
Mhm.
the idea of fighting someone had a different context because or at least the way I see it is like I'm I would never fight someone, a stranger right now. I would go out of my way as much as possible to fight them because you don't know what these people know.
Mhm.
And even if it's not like a super dangerous altercation where you're scared for your life,
Mhm.
you still don't know what these people know, and accidents can happen.
Mhm.
This movie came out just a couple years before Occupy Wall Street,
Mm.
and the whole capitalism is bad movie. I know that's been happening since the 60s,
Mhm.
but um, I watched this movie the week I turned 18,
Mhm.
and I watched this movie 2 weeks before I left for boot camp. So like it hit me at just the right time to affect how I thought about society and thought about masculinity.
Mhm.
And it makes me sad because like I feel like bro dudes have uh, took this movie away from people who
Mm.
actually want to look at it in depth. And like
Mhm.
there's all these people out here like that like kind of view Tyler Durden as a messiah, which is not a good thing. But if you say you like this movie, you get assumed you're one of those people. And I think this movie is far deeper than a lot of like the young 20-year-olds I was hanging out with
Mhm.
back then took it for.
Well, and I think that plays into that theme. And even the comment that you made before, I had to go to YouTube to figure out how to fix my sink. I have to go towards something to teach me how to do something. And I feel like this hit a generation of people who had this severe lack of identity. And take this and take Tyler Durden as a father figure, as a model for how you can be and be fucking cool or badass or what you want to be but don't know how to be. And since the movie portrays it that way, the way he dresses, the way he looks, the way he talks and inspires people, oh, those are admirable things. How does this character do it? He does it in this way. Let me adopt those types of characteristics. Let me admire that because that's what I want for myself and otherwise don't know how to get it.
Yeah, and but it's a mixed bag though because there's a lot of contradictions in this movie too.
Yeah, yeah. If
There's
for
a
irony's sake, yeah,
yeah,
for
for
the
irony's sake, yeah.
narrative's sake, yeah.
There's a scene where Brad Pitt, voted sexiest man alive, however many fucking times, is
Mhm.
looking at a Gucci ad with a
Yep.
guy with the exact same body he has, and he laughs at it
Mhm,
because that's not manly, even
mhm.
though that is him. That is literally just a copy of the
Okay,
what
yeah.
he's projecting into the world. So
Mhm.
if we go one step deeper, Jack is looking at that Gucci ad saying
Yeah.
that's not what a man looks like, while he is also wanting to be Tyler, which looks exactly that way.
Yeah, it's that kind of, like, insecurity of
Yeah.
that's what a man it's again, that's what society tells me what a man's supposed to look like. I don't look like that, so I must not be a real man, so I reject that idea while also projecting myself as being the idea of what a real man looks like. Yeah, it's like
I
it's
don't want to
this
buy what you're
psychosis.
selling, but I have nothing else to buy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and even he goes on the spiel from his perspective, Jack's perspective, where after that, he talks about Fight Club, and the way he describes it is something like, on the first day, people come into Fight Club and they're a white dough bread or something. They're soft. And then weeks later or a month later, they're chiseled wood or something. So even the way he describes it is completely contradictory to what he's mentioning earlier of like, oh, that's bullshit. But that's how he like sells his club even and on why it's effective.
Well, I think what he's trying to get out there is you come in with no purpose.
Mm,
Like why do I go to a gym?
mm,
Am I actually worried about my health? Do I actually want my wife to find me attractive? You're
yeah.
or am I going in there for my own ego and my own vanity?
Hmm.
And if you sit down and really think about it, you might not like the answers. And I think that's what this movie does is it asks you hard questions and then doesn't really give you an answer. It gives you a bunch of options, and
Hmm.
you can pick the easier answer and lie to yourself, or you can pick the harder answer and then really have to self-reflect.
Yeah. And also to that point of like, why do I go gym? Even one thing I thought we were going to bring up that kind of comes from this movie is maybe I go there to have a society, to
Yeah.
have, to build some sort of community that I can be a part of to then kind of adopt that as part of my identity of who I am, which then ultimately leads to your interesting idea of this being like a sneaky cult film, like this being a cult. So you prepared a lot of notes about like the ideas of cults and stuff like that. Could you share some of that?
Yeah, so I went there's a documentary on Netflix that talks about what actually is a cult,
Mhm.
and it breaks a cult has to have four things.
Okay.
And the four things are there's a charismatic leader,
Okay.
there's an indoctrination process,
Mhm.
there is exploitation of its members,
Mhm.
and it ask if the behaviors of the group is harmful for the members.
Mhm.
Um, and I think this checks every box, at least in some way. It's a lot like your cooter test.
Yeah. Yeah, is this cult? Check, check, check. Well, that's interesting because also too something that sticks out in my mind and talking about kind of the indoctrination process, but even how that's possible is I think a lot of the time the stereotype that we get about cults is, oh, they pick the people who are kind of like most vulnerable, most alone. And it's interesting to me that this whole thing is just surrounding this generation of men that they describe as being like a man with no war, with no real conflict, with no real guidance, no real fathers. And part of his indoctrination process is he has a quote of something like, "We are God's unwanted children," where he already associated like the father figure as like the God figure. We are all abandoned. We are all rejected. We all carry this insecurity of masculinity within us. And that's who we take. And it ends up being so prominent that it's people all around the country that are like in these various degrees of influence and things, the police, the servers, how that plays out. And so that really kind of speaks to the idea of like the cult and like who would you pick up all of these men of society, who's
Yeah.
vulnerable.
Well, and then if we think about this, so this is pre-internet, where
Hmm.
right now it's very easy for us to find people with common interests. Like
Sure.
I can just get on Facebook and type in something I like, and a bunch of groups will come up, and eventually I'll find a group that will accept me for liking the same things they like.
Hmm.
And I think this is why a lot of people start to identify themselves either by their religion or their political party or their favorite sports team. Like
Hmm.
like it becomes a huge part of who they are
Hmm.
because they automatically feel like they're accepted in a larger group, and they
Hmm.
automatically know that they'll be welcomed somewhere. And I think before, the internet was so prevalent in everybody's life, that wasn't the case. Like if you just lived in a small town, good luck finding someone that likes the same shit you like, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And one thing, so I was having a conversation very recently, actually, with Jacqueline from A Cut Above, and she was kind of asking me some things about how it feels to like go to Korea and like come back and how I see myself and those kind of things. And one thing that I kind of noticed and the way I described it was like living in Korea is kind of like going grocery shopping at like an Aldi, where there's generally like less choices, but still a lot of people go there because it doesn't feel overwhelming. It's more simple and like I'm going to choose this, I'm going to choose this. And you had brought this up before, the idea of like these choices and this overwhelming like sense of choices. When I go to Korea, I always joke, I know I'm back in Korea when I'm in my apartment and I look down out the window and I look into the street and every single car is either black, white, or gray. Literally every car. There's no bright blues with the spoilers and no bumper stickers. No, like it's white, black, or gray. They're like people dress a certain kind of way and they have this kind of sense of identity of what it means to be Korean. Whereas American kind of culture is all about driven by this like individualistic type of identity. And it's interesting to look at this as a timepiece for America in 1999, specifically American males, and to say, like, we have no identity, and that's driving us insane. That's creating these nihilistic thoughts in our heads. We don't know where we belong. We're literally willing to join a cult just to have some sort of society that we fit into. And I think that's very potent looking back 30 years later to see where our society kind of is now, where people still feel like they're questioning, like, what's wrong? What's going on? Why are we like this? And it's like, a lot of that is in this kind of movie,
Yeah,
honestly, and like
yeah.
how I feel as an American man, as an American, just period, American period, of this like, what is our identity? What is our culture? What is our society? And where do I belong into it? It's not as defined as I find it is like in Korea in particular.
What you're saying reminds me of the the first 2 weeks I got out of boot camp.
Hmm.
So for 8 weeks, I had people telling me when to eat, when to
Hmm.
work out. I didn't make a single decision for myself for 8 weeks.
Hmm.
And there is a level of comfort to that because you're not responsible for anything.
I bet
And
there
then
is.
that first 2 weeks out, I was numb. I was like, "Can I go eat breakfast right now? There's no one here to tell me I can or can't."
Hmm.
And that having to make those choices again as a very young person after
Hmm.
that was taken away from me,
Hmm.
the freedom of having no responsibility,
Hmm.
it can be appealing to some people.
Hmm.
Um, and I think a lot of people stay in the military or stay in a dead end job because there's a level of comfort of knowing exactly what's you're going to get into every day.
Hmm.
Um, but another point, what you're saying is a lot of this came back during the pandemic because we were
Hmm.
all stuck at home and everyone got really lonely, got really depressed. And when the pandemic was over and we got the ability to go out and make choices again, exact same thing. Well, like, what am I supposed to do? Who
Yeah.
I forgot who I was, and now
Mhm.
you have to figure it all out again.
Yeah, it's like I can do anything, but that responsibility is placed on my shoulders.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if I don't do anything or I do something wrong or I do something stupid or I waste my time, that's on me. I made those choices and everybody is kind of judged or reflected on that individualistic identity in American kind of culture. Is like, well, what do you bring? What are I so yeah, it's interesting. And I love the perspective of the military because that's exactly just like there's got to be this sense of comfort of just
Mhm.
eat now, well, we work out now, this very strict schedule where that just kind of takes the weight off of your mind of like, I know who I am, I'm told who I am,
Yes. Yeah.
and somebody above me makes the decisions and I just kind of go with that. That's gotta be like very rewarding in some ways, or just like taking the burden off. So
Well, a lot of those points
mhm.
that classify a cult, you could also put it right into the military because
Yeah.
they want the same thing. They want this orth I can't say the word authoritarianism.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Authoritarianism.
that's the word. So
Mhm.
at the beginning of the movie, the narrator Jack is so he's against it. His doctor's telling him what he can and can't do. His boss is
Mm.
telling him what he can and can't do, and he tries to break out and find himself
Mhm.
just to rebuild another society where there's someone telling him what to do.
Yeah.
And because he doesn't want the responsibility, so he gives it all to Tyler. And the men under him don't want all the responsibility, so they give it to Tyler.
Mhm.
Even though they're fighting against all these corporations and the
Mhm.
cops,
Yeah.
they're just trading one for the other.
Mhm. That's smart shit. No, you're right. Yeah. And again, and it's this kind of like bitterment too that the main character has again with his father. He comes back to this idea of they are destroying everything their fathers valued and worked for. Like that's the core of everyone in the cult is happy to do that, even if they're not aware of why they're doing it. It's like so many of these different things of this sense of belonging, this sense of I don't have to decide, this sense of like fuck you to my father, the people who tell me what to do, but like why do you feel that way? It's like abandonment issues and just like complete lack of identity or fitting into anywhere for the first 30 years of your life. That's all like very like sympathetic in a way that's a little kind of scary, because then you go back to your idea of saying like the people who worship characters like Tyler Durden or look up to Tyler Durden or Patrick Bateman and stuff like that, because on a psychological level, once you break it down piece by piece, you're like, man, it sucks to feel alone. You know, it
Yeah.
sucks to feel like you don't have an identity. It sucks to feel like completely hopeless and like you don't belong. But then this movie takes it like, well, the solution of that is you fucking blow shit up, you
Well,
destroy society.
I think it's he overcorrected, right?
Mm,
Because if the movie had stopped, Tyler started Fight Club, and now there's fight clubs in all these cities, and then the movie just ended,
mhm,
that wouldn't be the case. Is the problem is they went too far and they started Project Mayhem, because
mhm,
all they did was they built a community where basically all these people who need therapy
mhm.
are fighting each other instead. You
Yeah.
know, there's a scene and it's very emotional for me. I don't know about anywhere else, but there's the scene where he hits the priest with the water hose.
Uh-huh.
And then later, they do another scene and then they come back and that priest is fighting that same guy and the priest wins. He chokes him out.
I didn't pick up on that.
The priest
Mm,
stands up and immediately starts bawling and hugs the guy
mm,
because he's had this emotional release. He's had this personal
mm,
interaction with another person.
mhm,
And, like that was obviously a part of his life that was
mhm,
missing. And you see the moment where it gets fulfilled, where he doesn't feel alone anymore.
mhm.
And man, that'll hit you if you think about it too hard. The
That is
the pro
powerful. I did not pick up on that.
Yeah, yeah, so that's the priest.
Mm,
And but then, like, so one dogma failed him, so he embraced
mhm,
another dogma. But I don't ever actually see that priest become part of Project Mayhem.
mm,
So what he really did is he replaced dogma with community.
mhm,
And I find nothing wrong. I think that is the way to do it. Uh Put yourself around other people who care about you
mhm,
as much as you care about them, and you'll have a good life.
mhm.
Um, and I think that's what a lot of the men who join Fight Club are doing.
Yeah.
I try to separate Fight Club and Project Mayhem because I think Project Mayhem is the actual cult,
Mhm.
while Fight Club is just like a self-help group. It's another support group, like from the beginning of the movie, where these
Yeah.
people they're counting on each other to vent their frustration and their loneliness and their
Mhm.
aggression. It's just a community to release your emotional buildup, basically.
Well, and watching it this time, so going off of that point, watching it this time and knowing all the beats and knowing where the movie was headed and everything like that, I actually found it very interesting that the beginning of the film, what he does is join communities, even though he's lying about why he's going there, and he gets some relief. You know, the movie says like, "Oh, I went and talked to people and cried and did these things and I got some relief." But the thing that's like weird about it though is a lot of that is played for comedic relief. And even the idea, one of the groups that he joins is the Men with Testicular Cancer, where he meets Bob. And the idea of even like men showing vulnerability is played a little bit for a laugh because they can't just let you see these men embracing each other and sharing in a community and sharing in a common tragedy without the idea of like, oh, look at Bob's bitch tits and like my face is shoved between them and he's sweaty. And like that's when the emotional break happens. But you can't really actually like linger on that and saying, like, wow, this man is actually finding like some kind of help for his
I, I
problems.
think
Yeah.
I think the reason they have to do the humorous tone is because it's the beginning of the movie and they
Yeah,
don't want to bum you out
sure.
immediately.
Hmm.
But I mean, I think when he talks about it, I read the book this week too, so like
Okay.
I'm trying not to get the movie and the book mixed up, but he finds a community where people are actually listening to him,
Hmm.
and that's
Mm,
that's the difference. Is because they think he's dying,
hmm.
they actually listen to him opposed to just he's just there, like
Hmm.
when he's at work.
Hmm.
And like, so there's a scene where one of the guys doing a meeting and he's like, I already told it with my buddy here. And like that fake camaraderie is so fucking toxic. It pisses me off so much when someone I don't know acts like they're my friend.
Yeah.
And you go over to the self-help groups, and
Mhm.
those people actually do want to be your friend. It's because
Mhm.
they think you're dying, but they
Mhm.
actually do want to be your friend. Like
Well, and there's a yeah. Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
he actually cares about Chloe, and it shocks him when she dies, and he realizes that he actually cared about her.
Mhm.
And that's another scene where he's figuring himself out.
Well, there's a great line that they do that really sums that up of when people think you're dying, they really listen to you instead of just waiting for their turn to speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And like,
that's where he gets the relief, yeah.
so like you seek your whole life trying to find a couple people who will do that without you having to be dying, like
Mhm.
you're looking for a partner or a best friend who will actually listen to you, and then
Mm.
you will listen, you generally want to listen back.
Mhm.
And so again, it's them overcoming loneliness and seeking community. He just
Yeah.
went about it in a very weird way.
Which again is another one of those contradictions that you brought up earlier, because ultimately what their society is built on, the like their number one rules and stuff is like, we don't ask questions about Project Mayhem. It's
Yeah.
like becomes this opposite thing of like, we're not talking this out. This is authoritarian. Like, I tell you what to do. There is no discussion here. I'm the top. Nobody asks any questions. You follow the lead. So that that's just another one of those contradictions that it feels like this movie is based on some like, yeah, fuck yeah, ideas and like, yeah, that's right, you say it that way, but then when you really like start picking at it, you're like, well, no, these are complete opposite contradictions of what you're saying, which is part of the irony of the film, which I really enjoy.
Well, I think it talks to about he was at an extreme point in his life, and he tries
Hmm.
to overcome it by another extreme action.
Hmm.
When if you're just bouncing back and forth from extremes, you can't really be happy because
Hmm.
there's no time to settle, or there's no time for peace.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. um we didn't talk like I don't want to run too long. There's like so much to kind of to go over, but is there any kind of like element of the film? We've talked a lot about the themes, but are there any elements of like the film or the story itself that we haven't gone over yet that you found particularly interesting to kind of wrap it up?
I really like the idea of them using Jack as a narrator.
Mm,
He talks over. There's scenes where he's like Tyler's working in the background and he's explaining to he's breaking the fourth wall,
mm-hmm,
and it's done in such a way that it doesn't feel like he's breaking the fourth wall. It's not like Deadpool where you're like, God, fuck, he's talking to me. But uh, I think that was a very bold choice. I don't know how another way to do it and
mm-hmm,
hide the fact they're the same person,
mm-hmm,
but the more I watch it, the more clever I think that is.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
You don't, especially when you can hear Jack's what he's talking to you. He's basically letting you know what he's thinking
Mm-hmm,
without it being like a thought bubble or
mm-hmm,
speaking over. Um, so that also like the way he interacts with Marla. Like,
mm-hmm,
we talk so much about how this movie views masculinity, but
mm-hmm.
you could easily talk about you could write a whole paper about Marla in this
Yeah.
movie,
Mhm.
uh, and what society has done to her, and
Mhm.
how this love triangle that she doesn't even know she's a part of.
Yeah.
Uh, 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 I think this is a common theme where uh, men
Mhm.
they will interact with, if you're a straight cis man, you'll interact with your wife
Mm.
and your best friend differently when society tells you your wife should be your best friend.
Mm.
And he never really tries to do that. He never tries to make Marla his best friend
Mhm.
because he likes her, but he's also jealous of her because
Mhm.
Tyler likes her too.
Well,
Um,
and to that point, it's weird that it's this kind of like self-punishment thing where he sees it as Tyler is with her. So that's what she wants. She wants the better looking man. She wants the masculine man who's cut and ripped and can inspire people. That I don't deserve her. I project this character that I've created that I see as my idealistic man, and he's the one who's with her, even though she really is with him. He can't even accept that.
and because he feels like he doesn't deserve her,
Hmm.
he he summons up false contempt for her.
Yeah.
He pretends like he doesn't like her
Mhm.
because he likes her, and that's like some second grade
Sure.
playground shit.
Yeah.
But again, he's a 30-year-old boy, so he's trying to figure it out.
Yeah,
Youthfully.
because well, that comes from the insecurity of fear of rejection, right?
Yes.
You're not going to accept me as I am. And so that's where that contempt comes from, is this imaginary rejection that has not happened, that doesn't exist. So yeah, that's its own
Yeah.
can of worms.
Yeah, and you can even go in deeper where he feels rejected by his father.
Yeah.
So he's already primed to feel that way. You
Hmm.
know.
Yeah. And that is one of the things too, kind of circling back around and like kind of ending where we began, is another one of the lines is he says when Tyler disappears for a moment where he can't, he's not talking to Tyler anymore for those moments, he has this line of, my father dumped me, Tyler dumped me. He's like, just this abandonment issues and just this rejection and this insecurity that's built around that rejection. And it's all very interesting. It's the themes are deep on this one.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
Like
we said, we could go on and on and on, and there's a lot to chew on, which makes this a very worthwhile film in a lot of ways. But let's wrap it up on an individual level. Matt, out of 5, how would you rate Fight Club?
well, this top tier movie for me. I would say 4.75.
Okay.
The only problem this movie has is that if you don't look at it fully, if you just skim this movie, it it might affect you wrong. You might take away the wrong messages.
Hmm.
But it's great for multiple viewings. It's
Hmm.
a fun watch and it's a deep watch.
Hmm.
You can watch this movie in almost any mindset and find enjoyment out of it. So yeah, 4.75 for me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I agree in a very similar kind of way where I feel like this movie does have a lot of, well, it's got a lot of good craft just in general. Fincher, I think he's a really great director. And he weaves this kind of tale of an unreliable narrator very well. And it's fun to go back once oh, they're the same people, and see the pieces. There's this one point that I don't think I've ever caught before where I'm pretty sure when he goes to the doctor for this first time, there's this quick little glitch of Tyler like forming or in the
Oh yeah.
background.
Yeah, there's like 4 or 5 of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's curious. And then to see the dialogue of, oh, we've got the same briefcase, or when the Tyler spoke, I spoke, or, things like that. And you're like, oh, shit. Okay. So I think that was very crafted very well. But I do agree that unfortunately, this film does such a good job of kind of masking some of these themes, or like poking fun at itself in a kind of clever way, though that's not blatantly obvious, that I do think that there's a tendency to take the worst things of this movie and apply it to your life or your theology or ideas of like masculinity and stuff like that. Actually, on our podcast, I don't remember what episode it was, but it wasn't that long ago. Randy was kind of making a similar kind of point where he specifically called out the idea of American History X, where that movie's kind of trying to do a similar thing where it's trying to like break down these walls and these identity, but they do it through this character who's like swole as fuck and like, admirable and protects his house and like stands up for these things that people take as like admirable things. And so they take the worst kind of pieces away from what American History X is actually trying to say. And I think that happens in this film too. I think that this is a great time capsule of 1999 to make some sense of kind of where society is today and like still some of the problems that exist out of a generation truly feeling this way, but not getting the better points of what this movie's trying to say. And that's kind of scary in a way. So ultimately, I do still kind of consider this a kind of a classic type of film. Specifically 1999 absolutely like encapsulates those kind of feelings of society and things going on at that time. And I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5. So cool. Well, that was a fantastic discussion. Thank you very much, Matt. Let's take it to a lighter note and finish on with some fun. And let's play a little Rotten Tomatoes. Certified fresh to death. All right, certified fresh to death. This is a segment I have to put a little spin on because we can't do it the same way we do it on the Straight Chillin' podcast. So in this one, Matt, you got to beat the house. So I have 3 different little segments here. So Rotten Tomatoes, this is going to be critic score across the board. Okay.
All right.
So which one of these Fincher movies do you think is higher on the critic score? Okay. Between Seven, Fight Club, and Zodiac, which has the higher score?
I'm going to say 7.
7. Okay.
Across the board, I think Fight Club's probably the lowest one on this because it's so divisive.
Mm-hmm.
Zodiac is a wonderful movie, but I just think 7 has a broader appeal across the board. Like soccer moms, college guys, everyone loves 7. So I'm going to go with 7.
Okay. I can't reveal yet because I don't want to ruin the next ones, but again, talking about Brad Pitt, and I specifically chose some of these movies because I feel like all of them are kind of horror adjacent in some way. So of the Brad Pitt films, Interview with a Vampire, Fight Club, and World War Z, which one do you think is the highest critic score?
I'm going to say Interview with a Vampire. I think I don't think people liked World War Z. I don't think that did well. And again, Fight Club's so divisive that some people are going to poo-poo it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Interview with a Vampire.
Okay. And Red Dragon these are Norton films. Red Dragon, Glass Onion, and Fight Club. Which one do you think is the highest?
I'm going to go Glass Onion again because I think it has the broadest appeal. The more people can find enjoyment in that movie than the other two.
Okay. So I'm going to go across the board and just go down the scores of everything, and then we'll see if you beat the house or not. 7, 82% from critics. Fight Club, 79. Zodiac, 90. Yeah. People love some Zodiac. The Brad Pitt films, Interview with a Vampire, 64. Whoa. Fight Club, 79. And World War Z, 66. So even Interview with the Vampire is lower than World War Z. That it was very surprising to me as well. I was pretty shocked by that. And then finally, Red Dragon, 69. Glass Onion, 92, and of course, Fight Club at 79. So here's what I'm going to do, Matt, actually. So you didn't beat the house technically, but you did get in a check for Glass Onion. That one was the highest. And your little comment, you said, I think Fight Club is the lowest between 7, Fight Club, and Zodiac. And that was technically correct because it's 79, 82, and 90. So I will give you, Matt, what do you want this week? You want a Hell Yeet? You want a Hell Skeet or some I fuck a space vampire?
Yeah. Can you tell me you'd fuck a space vampire?
Yeah, I'd fuck a space vampire. There you go. That's Matt's chant. I thought you might want that one. All right, cool. So one more fun segment since we got so deep and heavy today. Let's talk about our cooter of the week.
Straight chillin'. Cooter of the week.
All right, Matt, I can't do everything this week, so let's see if you can rise to the occasion. Matt, do you think you can tell us the 5 points of cooterdom?
Looking attire.
Okay, looking attire.
Arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
Patheticness. Sexual deviance and manipulation.
Killed it. Hashtag hard with us. Certified. I got to get Rain to work up that that certificate. But yes, okay. So Matt, who do you think is the cooter of the week in Fight Club?
Well, I have a question for you. Are we counting Jack and Tyler as one person or two?
I think we should treat them as two.
All righty.
Since they're represented by two different actors in this film, two different kinds of wardrobes, their interactions are mostly split between the identity or like the idea of two different people. So I think for the sake of this segment, I think two is good. So what do you think?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I'm ready to go down either road. I'm going to nominate Tyler, but I'm actually very curious if he's going to hit enough points.
Okay. So, well, let's go down. Let's go the easy ones first, and let's say manipulation.
Oh, for sure. That's all he's doing.
Yeah, that's all he's doing. That's his biggest
Marla,
one.
He's manipulating Tyler. He's manipulating everyone in the cult. So yeah, that's probably his main point.
Yeah, and even if you treat it as his as his separate person, even him saying things like "Don't talk about me," or he speaks this kind of like, let's just destroy the world. But when it comes down to it and, Ed Norton is going to shoot himself or he's going to ignite the bomb, then all of a sudden Tyler's worried for his own safety.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's manipulating himself. I don't know if we've had a cooter that does that.
There you go. Yeah, he is manipulating himself. So manipulation, check. I would say smug arrogance. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, he thinks he knows what's best more than everyone else around him. He's right some of the time, but that doesn't mean he's not arrogant about it. Yeah.
Yeah, right in a sense, because he's like, have I ever steered you wrong? And it's like, well, I mean, technically, yes, but from your perspective, you're so fucking smug that you wouldn't recognize it as wrong. So, yeah. So yeah, I think he hits definitely manipulation and smug arrogance. Looking attire. This is an interesting one and one we didn't really talk about in the themes of this film, but the way that he portrays Tyler in his like wardrobe and how he looks, what do you think?
I would give it to him because he's definitely I'm sexiest man alive, Brad Pitt, stylish as hell. But this is also like if we put it in the time period, like grunge is still a thing. And so like it might look a little crazy to us, but back then I don't think he would have turned many heads. I'd give it to him, but he wouldn't get a lot of points.
Let me ask you a question. Brad Pitt, shaved head or no shaved head? How you going?
Oh, no shaved head. That 1999 is like the only time you can have that hair. So yeah, have that hair.
I also, it's like grunge, but it's like grunge chic. You know, it's like I want to look kind of dirty while also looking super fashionable and put together.
It was a great time period to be poor because it was fashionable to be poor. So.
There you go. Okay, so then we have two more that are pretty interesting. Let's go with sexual deviance.
See, this is
this is where it gets weird. Because
he is lying to Marla about who he is. But I don't know if she wants to have sex. She she's the one that says you have to keep me up all night.
Mm-hmm.
And I
That's
mean, like,
true.
and,
That's fair.
and they're doing some kinky shit.
Yeah.
And he asked Jack if he wants to come in, but that's himself.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like he's in a toxic relationship, but I don't know if he's being sexually deviant.
Yeah, it's weird because it is consensual in a sense, and that's where it's hard to split the characters, because if they were two people, then there could be it would maybe again play more into the manipulation of where he's using his sexual relationship with Marla to kind of manipulate Jack in a way to break him down even further. But I guess it wouldn't count as a sexual deviance because with Marla, it's consensual. And she even knows him as Tyler Durden. So she doesn't even know him as Jack. So fair game, I think, on that one. And then finally, overall patheticness.
He gets pathetic there at the end.
He does, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like there's the line that really bugs me is when they're talking about Bob dying, and he says, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. And I think that was just put in to make him look more pathetic and more villainous. Like that was his only twirling his mustache moment. He could have easily said something like Bob knew what he signed up for, but instead they go out of their way to make Tyler look like a shithead because it's the end of the movie. They want you to think he's a shithead. So I would probably give it to him. It wouldn't be high up there. He is very confident in himself. Like the smug arrogance is very high, but I don't know about the patheticness. What do you think?
Well, I think like we said before, at the end where his values as the character Tyler Durden, like, where he's willing to sacrifice Bob, and he says like nobody has an identity and this is part of the bigger thing. But when it's his life at stake, when he's the one that's going to be gone, then all that confidence drains, all that theology drains away. And then he becomes kind of like a normal person where it's just self-preservation. I'll say whatever I need to do to preserve my life. And so all of his grandiose like bullshit that he like really gets other people to go with disappears like that when it's about himself, So I think in some ways that's pathetic because he's not really willing to be that martyr. He wants the godlike respect and appreciation, but he's not willing to be that martyr. He'll let other people be the martyrs or like die for his beliefs, but not himself. So in that way, I would say that that's kind of pathetic. Yeah. So I think he hits high enough. Tyler Durden, Cooter.
Let's book him.
Book him, Matt. All right. Well, Matt, I have really, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for coming on here. One more time, tell everyone who's watching and listening, where can they find your stuff?
So boldcitylongsword.com is the website for the school I teach at. And Swords in Stereo on Podbean is our podcast, where we talk about historical fencing from 16th century Germany. Okay.
Cool. Thank you for coming on again, Matt. You gave some great insights as always. I really enjoyed the conversation. If you want more of this, check out our other content on YouTube. This is episode number 4. So we do have some other kind of horror adjacent movie reviews that you can check out there in the playlist. We have a ton of other content as well. Movie reviews every week from the Straight Chilling podcast, game reviews, tier list, everything like that, mostly focused on horror. But we do some horror adjacent stuff from time to time. So check that out. And until next time, don't forget to keep chilling.